The two greatest swordsmen ever to be in this or any other universe of fact or fiction, more skillful masters of the blade even than Cyrano de Bergerac, Scar Gordon, Conan, John Carter, D'Artagnan, Brandich Daha, and Anra Devadorus. Two comrades to death and black comedians for all eternity. Lusty, brawling, wine-bibbing, imaginative, romantic, earthy, thievish, sardonic, humorous, forever seeking adventures across the wide world, fated forever to encounter the most deadly of enemies, the most fell of foes, the most delectable of girls, the most dire sorcerers, and a supernatural beast and other personages. Hello and welcome to Liam's Lyceum. I'm your host, Liam, aka Hemvar. Today I'll be doing a spoiler-free review of Fritz Leiber's Swords in the Mist. Swords of the Mist was first compiled and published in 1968. It is the third in the Swords series and the third chronologically in the saga of Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser, following Book 1, Swords and Deviltry, and Book 2, Swords Against Death, both of which I have reviews for. This time around there are 6 stories, and overall the book is shorter than the first 2. I really enjoyed these stories, and I'm going to go into why. So let's get into the stories. The Cloud of Hate is story number 1, originally published in the magazine Fantastic in 1963. A hateful fog is conjured, and we are reintroduced to our famous duo bantering around a fire in the cold streets of Leiber. This unnatural mist has ill magical effects full of reckless hate, wrath, and enslaving rage. It's a great tale to kick off the adventures. Story 2 is Lean Times in Leiber. The story was also originally published in Fantastic magazine, though in 1959. The duo have gone their separate ways. In the first page or so is the narrator talking about the gossip as to why, one thing involving how to actually spell Fafhrd's name, which made me laugh, as this story is a perfect example of the party and their status as iconic partners. In the story, Fafhrd has actually become pious and hangs out with a priest of Isaac of the Jug. This god of sorts has suddenly become more popular with his patronage. As part of worship, he uses his skaldic training to make up sagas. The Grey Mouser has started working for one Polg, an extortioner. This story takes an exciting, at first seemingly dark turn and ends with a flourish of hilarity. Their mistress, the sea, is the third and the shortest tale. It doesn't even take up a full 4 pages. This tale is original to the book, not having been previously published anywhere. The story also seems mostly to put the stories in a cohesive chronology. It puts them firmly back at sea as they are reacquainted with it. This leads right into the next story. Story 4, When the Sea King's Away, was the third and final story to be published in the magazine Fantastic, this time in 1960. It is a tale of magical adventure to a pelagic realm. It involves witchcraft, undead, and a very interesting adventure that our heroes seem to barely escape from. Story 5, The Wrong Branch, is the second story originally published in this volume. Like the first, it is also very short, being only 7 pages or so. This story also brings them to a point for the next story. This one is a lot more interesting as the characters' beings are transferred to a completely different planet. The last story, Adept's Gambit, was actually the first novella finished by Leiber way back in 1934, but wasn't published until 1947 in his anthology Knight's Black Agents, after some other tales of the duo had already been published. It's quite long and is divided into chapters. I believe there are other versions of this story elsewhere, and I'm not sure if it was originally featuring Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser, but it does here. As I mentioned talking about the last story, it does not take place on Nawan, but on Earth, in the Levant, specifically the city of Tyr as part of the Seleucid Empire, the year likely being 197 BC. That means it's technically historical fantasy, and particularly an adventure novel, or novella rather. While I like how it's set up at the previous story, you can tell this is the earliest of his stories, since it doesn't work well in spots. It starts off fine, but really drags in parts, while other parts are quite nice as well, though. In the story, Fafhrd seems to be the target of some sorcery, and Grey Mouser does seem so as well, though it's mostly harmless. Though Fafhrd actually initially blames Mouser for it, which reminded me he had magical training. This part was also pretty funny, partially because I didn't even remember that the Mouser had magical training, because it doesn't come up very often. Our characters are a little different here. For example, Fafhrd doesn't believe in magic, which is the exact opposite of his Nawan counterpart. We can thank this story in H.P. Lovecraft's criticisms for the world of Nayland, for which I'm grateful. Those are our 6 stories for this time around. Overall, we have our dastardly heroes, for certainly I think the word still applies even if they are thieves and such. The stories are fast-paced, action-packed, banter-filled, oozing with monstrous horrors, sorcery, and singing swords. Leiber is rightly called a grandmaster of sword and sorcery. Honestly, if the last story could just be ignored, it would easily be 5 stars, though rather short, admittedly. I really love the buddy-buddy action that goes on here, and I don't know if they're the original, but I would say they are probably the peak fantasy duo that you could base Riven and Kale off of, or Royce and Hadrian, or really any that have the vibe of sword and sorcery. I mean, I know Frodo and Sam are a pretty good duo, but they don't really have that vibe. They're more reluctant heroes, right? Or sword and sorcery heroes are, they just have a lust for life and a lust for adventure. Since I just recently read some Conan, it was also a good reminder that Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser aren't almost untouchable demigods like Conan and some other popular sword and sorcery protagonists and heroes. It's very nice because they're very human, and you fear for their circumstances sometimes, even though they do come out on top and they are exceptional swordsmen, like that quote from Leiber himself at the beginning of this review. Overall, though, I think I probably still like Swords Against Death slightly more, just a little bit more, though I'm really looking forward to Swords Against Wizardry, Volume 4. Now, anyways, I hope you enjoyed this review. This has been Liam with Liam's Lyceum. I have very much enjoyed reading this, and I can't wait to get to more Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser, and to more characters that are based off of them soon, even. Anyways, thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.